So I wanted to make a video on how to create our own global store. And I know that we can always use Redux and MobX and context and such, but I figured for funsies, it would be kind of cool if we could create our own global store and just explore how things work with instances. And in this case, we would use Singleton function that would just return its instance if it exists. If it doesn't exist, we would just create an instance and return it. So two sibling components that need to share data between each other can call this store, gets its instance, and two different components get the same instance. And we can provide set of methods that when you call these methods, either get the store or manipulate the store. And we can also create subscription methods so that whenever changes are made to the store, some callback function is ran when you subscribe. And when obviously you can unsubscribe when component is unmounted or destroyed, or maybe we no longer want to listen to the changes. So let's dive into it and let's take a look at this example. I created a sample project using Create React App and added two new components called input and display. And input is currently just very dumb component that's holding an input field, and display just has a hard-coded value in it. But the idea is whenever we type inside our input, we'll be storing that value in our Singleton global store, and then display will be able to grab that store and display it here. So we'll just communicate through the store rather than passing variables up to the parent and then passing back down to other sibling. And I'm going to quickly clean up the markup here that came with React, Create React App, add our input, and display. There we go. So as we type, this value will change and all the communications are going to be through the global store. So let's create the global store. We're just going to create a new file called store.js. And what we're going to make is an immediately invoked function. And the reason for it is to not pollute the global scope. And you shouldn't be able to access any values in the store from global scope. So it's going to be private per se. So to do that, we'll just we'll make our function called store. Actually, let's use the useStore syntax, kind of similar naming convention as React hooks. So we'll use it useStore. And useStore is going to be a function. So now to make it immediately invoked function, we'll wrap it in parentheses and call it like we would call a function. So just wrap the function in parentheses and call it. Alrighty, so first thing, we're gonna create a variable that holds its store's instance. So we can just say instance, let's call it store instance. Keep it as nothing. Then we have to create a method that will create the instance. So we'll just call it create store instance. And we'll do some things here, create methods, and we're gonna return those methods. And we'll use array, so it's kind of similar way as hooks. And our useStore returns a function that checks if store instance doesn't exist. We're going to make store instance equals create store instance. I misspelled create. create store instance, and it will return store instance. So idea is if this store instance doesn't exist, it hasn't been initiated yet, we'll first create it by calling create store instance and then return it. And all the magic is going to be inside of this create store instance. So inside of here, what we can do is basically set up our store. So we can set up our variable that's going to be called, in this case, boringly store. Make it empty string. Since we're not really working with objects or arrays, we don't really need that. We'll just create a simple string. And then we're going to create methods that will manipulate the store. So either get the store or set the store. So we'll just create methods called maybe, get store, which will be a very simple method, and it will just return the store. And then we can create another method. We'll just make a little space here. We'll call it set store. We'll make it so that we can pass new store. And then we can say we do store equals new store. And we can return a new store after that. So I think we have enough to just to see if it works, and we have to return the get store and set store. So in our code, we also have to export this. So when we will import this, we'll get this use store. We will run the use store inside of our functional component, which will return us the store instance. The store instance contains the return content from here. So basically these two methods. One is to get the store, this variable right here, and the other one is to set this variable. All right, so let's try it out, see if it works, if we didn't screw anything up. So we'll just go in our input file and import. We'll say use store from store. Let's save it. Sure. Okay, so nothing's breaking yet. And for fun, we can add this, my store, my global store. I'll just run it, and so that we can look at something. And here we can say const and destructure those two methods that we pass in our store right here. So we say const store, and then maybe set store, and we'll do use store and call it like this. And then we can do console.log, and we can console log store, just call it as a method, and this store called as a function will return my store. So here you go, we have my global store. Okay, so this works. So now when we type, we want to set that store. We'll make it something simple. We'll say on change. We'll take the event and do set store, and we're gonna pass event.target.value. So now as we're typing here, this global store value is being set to whatever we typed here. So now the only thing we want to do is display component to show that value. So I think for this component we're good. All right, let's take a look at the display component. So currently we just have this hard-coded value. So we'll do the same thing. We'll import use store from store. Then inside of display, we're going to this structure, some store for the time being. So the way we can call this whatever we want, kind of like the hooks. The order is what matters. So the first one is to get the store, first argument. The second item in the array would set the store, and third one, it doesn't exist, so we don't really have anything in there. But that's more or less the idea. I'm sure if you are familiar with hooks, that should make sense. So we'll just say store. Currently, we don't really care to set the store from this component, so I don't bother destructuring that. Store equals use store, and that's that. And we're going to so here's what we're gonna do. We will need state as well as effect to not pollute things. Just kind of thinking ahead. So we're just gonna we're gonna transfer the store into the state so that React can handle all the reactivity of changes in values, and we'll kind of explore how we can invoke those changes later. So I'm just gonna create a state and set state. Use state, and it's whatever, we can make it empty string, and we can pass state here, and let's say we can make just a hard-coded button that will get store. So whenever we click it, we can, get the instance of the store just to see that the changes are there and that we're actually in the same instance, and we're able to get the values between the two, the input and display. So we'll create a function that will set state by invoking store, and that should do it. So now when we type and hit get store, we get that value. So this value is retrieved and then set as a state inside of this display. Now obviously it's not reactive currently. We need to get store to see the changes, and I think that's the next idea that we have to explore, is subscribing to the changes. And I know that Redux and MobX kind of takes care of that with map to props, and I believe decorators, I think MobX uses, or used to at least use. So for us, we'll just have to create kind of like a subscription model. So in our store, we have two methods that lets us get store and set store, but nothing that would let us know that the store changed, therefore we should update our state because there were some changes made to the store. So what we can do, we can create a couple methods, one called maybe subscribe, another one maybe called unsubscribe. We can create a variable that will hold callback functions, and whenever we set a store, we can iterate through those functions and call them, and the calling of the function would do what we would decide it to do. So let's do that. So we're going to create another empty array called subs make it equals to empty array. Then we're going to create another method called subscribe. And we're going to pass a callback function. And that function, callback function, is going to be pushed to the subs. So we'll just take subs.push and push our function. So that's all subscribing will do. And the idea is now when we set the store here, before we return, we can say that we'll go through all the subs and we're gonna run all those functions in that subscriber array. And then I think another good idea is to have is another function that would be unsubscribe. So we'll pass a function. We'll find that function by reference inside of our array and remove it. So first we'll get the index of the function. And we're not going to do too many checks. Obviously, we would want to check if it exists before trying to remove anything. But we'll say subs.indexOf, and we'll say index of function that we just passed. So we'll just have to make sure that whatever the function we pass to subscribe, that's the same function we need to pass to unsubscribe. So once we have the index, we can use subs.splice and remove that item at index and one item. And that should unsubscribe us from the updates. So now in display, that's why I wanted to import UseEffect, because we don't want to subscribe and push the same function into the subscribers list every time our component re-renders. Mind you, we could implement like a check that checks if that same function already exists, and then if it does, don't push it. Don't just avoid doing that. But I believe that's the cleaner way to do it, is just using UseEffects. So we'll just use effect that takes a function, and I believe to make it behave like a component did mount or component will mount back in class-based components in React, I think we need to pass a second parameter or attribute as an empty array. Here, this is where we're going to subscribe. So we'll just sub here, and then we're going to have a return function that will unsub here. So we're going to create a function that says store to state. Make it equal a function, and this will do is exactly this, so that no longer we will not need to click the button to get the results updated. So I believe that's good. And inside of our UseEffect, we'll subscribe. Oh, so here's a mistake I probably did. Yes, I didn't return those two subscribe and unsubscribe methods. So they currently doesn't exist on our store. So now if we do that, now in our display we can destructure subscribe and unsubscribe, and we can say here, right? Yep. So we'll do subscribe, and we'll pass this store to state. So store to state will run every single time changes are made to the store. And let's take a look. This subscribe, type or subscribe is not a function. Subscribe is not a function. Let's take a quick look why subscribe is not a function. Oh, because I added in the wrong place. So set store and unsubscribe. Oop, we still need set state. Okay. All right. So we have something going on right now. So if we type, we get to see our changes right away, right? And that's what we wanted. That's what we tried to achieve, right? Using the global store, Singleton global store to pass the values. Obviously, there's a little bit more boilerplate than just saying, you know, grabbing like mobx and just wrapping your function and you're done. But I think for learning experience, I think this is a great way to explore instances and singletons and how we can set the store like this. So another thing we can explore is unsubscribing, obviously. So we'll have to unsubscribe and pass the same function, and we'll just do this on this click. So we'll just call this unsub, just so we can see unsub. Whenever we destroy this component, obviously we want to, you know, remove that function from the array that's being iterated every time we make a change in the store. So here we'll just do on the click, we'll just unsubscribe. And we'll pass that store to state function. We called it unsub. So now if we type, we see the reflecting results. If we do unsub and type, we no longer get the updates. Yep. So that's the majority of the things that I want to go through. This might seem a little complicated, but it's really not. The only thing is just kind of getting that you're creating the instance if it doesn't exist and returning that instance, and whoever imports the same method, same store, is getting the existing instance rather than like a new instance or such. And we're just manipulating these private values here to you know, set our states or stores. And the subscribers probably should be here in the scope of create store rather than the main function. Yep, that's that.